KLM 4805 is now ready to take off, and we're waiting for our ATC clearance.
It's March 27th, 1977. A fully loaded Boeing 747 is preparing for takeoff. Less than 5,000 feet away, another Boeing 747 is taxiing through thick fog on the same runway. What no one knew at that moment was that a chain of 5 seemingly minor events had already set the two jets on a deadly collision course. The Boeing 747 awaiting departure begins its takeoff roll. Hidden by dense fog, neither crew can see the other aircraft. With only seconds to react, both pilots make desperate last-minute maneuvers, but it's too late. The two jumbo jets collide, killing 583 people in the deadliest disaster in aviation history. The story of the Tenerife Airport disaster is filled with unfortunate coincidences. Coincidences that, had they unfolded even slightly differently, might have prevented the disaster entirely. And the first of those coincidences occurred long before either aircraft arrived in Tenerife. After a 6-hour flight from New York, Pan Am Flight 1736 is nearing its destination of Gran Canaria with 16 crew members and 380 passengers on board. Most of the passengers are American and Canadian tourists preparing to board the cruise ship MS Golden Odyssey in Las Palmas. KLM Flight 4805, another Boeing 747, is also en route from Amsterdam to Gran Canaria with 14 crew members and 235 passengers on board. Operated on behalf of the Holland International Travel Group, the charter flight is carrying passengers eager to begin their holiday in the Canary Islands. At the controls is Captain Jacob van Zanten, one of KLM's most respected pilots. With more than 11,700 flight hours, he is not only an experienced aviator, but also the airline's chief Boeing 747 flight instructor. As head of KLM's flight training department, he is so well known within the company that he occasionally appears in its advertising campaigns. But while Flight 4805 continues toward Gran Canaria, events unfolding on the ground are about to change the course of both flights. At 1:15 p.m., about 20 minutes before KLM 4805 is due to arrive, a bomb explodes inside a flower shop at the airport terminal. The attack is carried out by the Canary Islands Independence Movement, a separatist group seeking independence from Spain. 8 people are injured in the explosion, though fortunately no one is killed. But the bombing is only the beginning. As KLM 4805 begins its descent, authorities receive a warning that a second bomb has been planted somewhere in the airport. Gran Canaria Airport is immediately closed while security personnel search for the suspected device. With no indication of when the airport will reopen, KLM 4805 is forced to divert to the nearby Tenerife Los Rodeos Airport, landing there at 1:38 p.m. For the 235 passengers on board, their holiday begins with an unexpected delay. Pan Am 1736 receives the news while still more than an hour away from Gran Canaria. Initially, the crew considers slowing down and entering a holding pattern in the hope that the airport will soon reopen. But as time passes, it becomes clear that there is no indication of when operations will resume. Faced with an indefinite closure at their destination, the crew decides to divert to Tenerife Los Rodeos Airport, arriving roughly half an hour after KLM 4805. However, they are not alone. 3 other large jets have also been redirected to Tenerife, and the small airport is quickly becoming overcrowded. Built primarily to handle regional traffic, Tenerife Los Rodeos was never designed to accommodate so many wide-body aircraft at once. As more diverted aircraft arrive, the airport begins to fill beyond its intended capacity. Meanwhile, both flight crews are facing difficult decisions. For the passengers aboard the Pan Am flight, the delay is especially concerning. They are scheduled to board their cruise ship in Las Palmas, and if they arrive too late, the vessel could depart without them. As the delay stretches on, pressure begins to build. Tenerife Los Rodeos Airport is struggling to accommodate the sudden influx of diverted aircraft, and there's simply not enough parking space at the terminal for every jet. As a result, KLM 4805 is directed to park at the northwestern end of the taxiway that runs parallel to the runway. After about 20 minutes, the passengers aboard KLM 4805 are transported by bus to the terminal building. Pan Am 1736 is parked behind the KLM aircraft, but its passengers remain on board. At the time, there is still uncertainty about how long the delay will last, and the Pan Am crew chooses not to deplane their passengers. The KLM crew anticipates that once Gran Canaria reopens, arriving aircrafts will be competing for limited airport services, potentially causing further delays. To save time later, they decide to use the unexpected stop in Tenerife to take on additional fuel. By refueling now, they will have enough fuel to fly to Gran Canaria and then continue to Amsterdam without needing to refuel again. The aircraft takes on approximately 14,000 gallons of fuel, slightly delaying its departure. At the time, the decision appears perfectly reasonable. In hindsight, however, it will become one of several factors that contribute to the disaster. While KLM 4805 is being refueled, news arrives that Gran Canaria Airport has reopened, and the diverted planes begin preparing to continue their journeys. Pan Am 1736 requests permission to depart first, but the aircraft is parked behind the KLM jet. Because the taxiway is too narrow for a Boeing 747 to safely pass, the Pan Am crew is forced to wait until the refueling operation is complete. The flight to Gran Canaria is short, but it is anything but routine. The weather in Tenerife is known to be unpredictable, and conditions are beginning to deteriorate rapidly. Dense patches of fog drift across the airport, causing visibility to fluctuate from one moment to the next. As the afternoon progresses, visibility steadily falls toward the minimum required for safe operations. That, of course, would mean another delay of several hours and even more frustration for the passengers and crew. Although all of the diverted craft have now landed, the overcrowding is creating a new problem. The airport's limited parking areas are full, forcing several aircraft to park in unconventional locations and disrupting normal ground operations. One Boeing 747 parked at the northwestern end of the taxiway is blocking the airport's normal traffic flow, forcing departing aircraft to use the runway itself as a taxiway. With Gran Canaria Airport now reopened, everyone is eager to leave as quickly as possible. Air traffic control, therefore, clears KLM 4805 and Pan Am 1736 to begin taxiing in close sequence. To reach the departure end of the runway, both aircraft must taxi along the runway itself before turning around for takeoff, a procedure known as backtracking. The controller's plan was straightforward. Both aircraft will backtrack along runway 12 until reaching the third taxiway intersection, Charlie 3. There, they will exit the runway and continue along the parallel taxiway to the holding position for runway 30. At 4:56 p.m., KLM 4805 is ready to taxi. The crew contacts ground control and receives instructions to proceed toward the departure runway. As the aircraft approaches the runway, communication is transferred to the approach controller. The controller initially instructs the KLM crew to backtrack along the runway and leave via the third exit on the left. However, when the first officer reads back the instruction, he mistakenly refers to the first exit instead of the third.
Roger, sir. Entering the runway at this time at the first taxiway. The go off the runway again for the beginning of runway 30.
To avoid any misunderstanding, the controller simplifies the instructions.
Okay, KLM 80, correction 4805, taxi straight ahead for the runway and make backtrack.
KLM 4805 is now told to continue all the way to the end of the runway, make a 180-degree turn, and hold position for departure. The instruction is read back correctly. Yet moments later, Captain von Zanten asks whether the aircraft should leave the runway via exit Charlie 1, the first exit on the left. The controller immediately replies,
Negative, taxi straight ahead, up to the end of the runway and make a backtrack.
A short time later, as the aircraft passes another exit, von Zanten again asks whether this is the correct exit. The exchange suggests that there may still have been some uncertainty in the cockpit regarding the taxi route. As KLM 4805 taxis along the runway, the reported visibility is approximately 1,500 feet. However, weather conditions at Tenerife Los Rodeos are highly variable. Several witnesses later estimate that visibility in some parts of the airport may have been as low as 300 feet. The cockpit voice recorder provides another clue about the changing conditions. For several minutes, the KLM crew keeps the windshield wipers running. But as the aircraft reaches the end of the runway and begins its 180-degree turn, the wipers are switched off, suggesting that visibility may have been somewhat better in that part of the airfield. As KLM 4805 backtracks along the runway, Pan Am Flight 1736 receives taxi clearance.
We were instructed to contact you and also to taxi down the runway, is that correct?
Affirmative, taxi into the runway and leave the runway third to your left.
Third to the left, okay.
While taxiing toward the holding point, the Pan Am captain, Victor Grubbs, tells his crew that he would prefer to remain off the runway until the KLM aircraft has departed. However, amid a series of radio transmissions and a frequency change, that preference is never communicated to air traffic control. Instead, once Pan Am switches to the approach frequency, the controller instructs the aircraft to enter runway 12, backtrack behind KLM 4805, and leave the runway via the third exit on the left. In later interviews, Captain Grubbs explained why he accepted the clearance without suggesting an alternative. Communicating with controllers whose first language was not English, he preferred to avoid an unnecessary discussion over the radio if the clearance was safe and workable. As a result, Pan Am followed the controller's instructions. As Pan Am 1736 backtracks along the runway, the crew is still discussing which exit the controller intends them to use. Like the KLM crew before them, they are uncertain whether the instruction refers to the first exit or the third. Part of the confusion stems from the airport's unusual layout. The third exit, Charlie 3, was designed as a high-speed turnoff for aircraft landing from the opposite direction. Approaching it while backtracking requires a sharp 148-degree turn to the left, immediately followed by another 148-degree turn to the right to join the parallel taxiway. While such a maneuver might be manageable for a smaller aircraft, it is extremely difficult for a Boeing 747. The crew, therefore, begins to wonder whether the controller actually meant Charlie 4 instead. Unlike Charlie 3, the fourth exit provides a gentle 35-degree turn onto the parallel taxiway, making it a far more practical choice for a large aircraft. Before the Pan Am crew can ask for clarification, the controller calls KLM 4805 instead.
KLM 4805, how many taxiways did you pass?
The KLM first officer replies,
I think we just passed to Charlie 4 now.
a response that further illustrates how poor visibility has become. At 5:03 p.m., the Pan Am first officer comes on the frequency with one final question.
Would you confirm that you want the Clipper 1736 to turn left at the third intersection?
The controller immediately replies,
The third one, third one.
He places particular emphasis on the word third. For the Pan Am crew, the instruction is now unmistakably clear. They are expected to leave the runway via Charlie 3. The cockpit voice recorder from the KLM 4805 reveals another interesting detail. At the exact moment this exchange takes place, there is complete silence in the KLM cockpit. Investigators believe the crew was listening carefully to the Pan Am transmission. One possible interpretation is that the KLM crew believed Pan Am was already approaching the third exit and was merely confirming that it was the correct turnoff. If that was indeed their understanding, they may have assumed the runway would be clear within moments. In reality, Pan Am 1736 is still much farther down the runway. The crew is simply confirming which taxiway they are expected to use. Inside the Pan Am cockpit, the atmosphere remains calm. The cockpit voice recorder captures light-hearted conversation as the crew jokes in Spanish, counting 1, 2, 3 while referring to the runway exits. At the same time, they begin working through their pre-flight checklist. As the aircraft continues taxiing through the fog, the pilots call out the taxiway exits as they pass them. There's one. There is the second one. However, there is no call-out for Charlie 3, the exit they have been instructed to use. Exactly why remains uncertain. One possibility is that the crew's attention was briefly drawn to the radio as KLM 4805 began receiving its departure clearance. Having never operated at Tenerife before, they may have been interested in hearing the clearance they themselves would soon receive. Whatever the reason, Pan Am continues taxiing past Charlie 3 and remains on the runway as it heads toward the fourth exit. At 5:04 p.m., the approach controller makes another transmission.
Safe and 136, report leaving the runway.
Although the controller mistakenly used the wrong call sign, the Pan Am crew immediately recognizes that the instruction is meant for them and replies,
Clipper 1736.
In aviation phraseology, it's similar to saying, understood. This was simply an acknowledgement. The crew is not reporting that they have already left the runway. They are simply confirming that they understand the instruction and will report once they have exited. However, to anyone listening on the frequency, the exchange could easily have sounded different. If the KLM crew already believed that Pan Am was approaching the third exit, hearing the controller say, report when leaving the runway, immediately followed by Pan Am's acknowledgement, may have reinforced the impression that the aircraft was about to clear the runway or had already done so. Whether that is what the KLM crew actually believed can never be known. But investigators have suggested that this brief radio exchange may have contributed to the growing misunderstanding between the two aircraft. Roughly 6,500 feet away from Pan Am 1736, KLM 4805 reaches the end of the runway. After completing a 180-degree turn and lining up for departure, Captain Jacob von Zanten begins advancing the throttles to stabilize the engines for takeoff. But before the aircraft starts rolling, First Officer Klaus Mers immediately intervenes. Wait a minute, we don't have ATC clearance. Captain von Zanten eases the throttles back to idle and replies, I know that. Go ahead, ask. The first officer quickly calls the controller.
KLM 4805 is now ready to take off, and we're waiting for our ATC clearance.
In aviation, an aircraft requires two separate clearances before departure. The first is an ATC route clearance, which tells the crew how to navigate after takeoff. The second is a takeoff clearance, which authorizes the aircraft to begin its takeoff roll. The controller, believing the crew is requesting their route clearance, responds.
KLM 8705, you're clear to the Papa Beacon, climb to and maintain flight level 9 Right, and after takeoff, proceed with heading 040 until intercepting the 325 radial from Las Palmas de Mar.
Although the route clearance naturally includes the words after takeoff, it is not a takeoff clearance. As the transmission ends, Captain von Zanten begins advancing the throttles once again. The evidence suggests he believed he had received everything required to depart. Meanwhile, First Officer Merce hurriedly reads back the route clearance.
Roger, sir, we're in 2 with the Papa Beacon. Flight level 90, right turn out 040 with the 7325, and we now take off.
The exact wording of that final phrase has never been determined with certainty because of the quality of the cockpit voice recording. Investigators have long debated whether he said, "We are now at takeoff," "We are taking off," or something similar.
We now take off.
Whatever the precise words, Captain von Zanten says to the crew, "Let's go, check thrust," and advance the thrust lever to takeoff position. Although the KLM flight has begun takeoff roll, there are several opportunities to stop what is about to happen. As the controller listens to the first officer's readback, he acknowledges it with a simple
Okay.
A few seconds later, he continues. But at almost the exact moment, the Pan Am crew believes the KLM aircraft may be preparing to depart while they are still on the runway. The Pan Am first officer immediately transmits,
No, we are still taxiing down the runway, the Clipper 1736.
The two transmissions overlap almost perfectly.
Why the Clipper 1736?
Because VHF radios cannot receive two simultaneous transmissions on the same frequency, the signals interfere with one another.
Okay.
Why the Clipper 1736?
Instead of hearing the controller's instruction to stand by for takeoff, the KLM crew hears only the initial "okay," followed by a loud squeal caused by the overlapping transmissions.
Okay. Okay.
Neither the controller nor the Pan Am crew hears that squeal. From their perspective, their own transmissions sound perfectly normal. The controller therefore believes his instruction has been received and shifts his attention to Pan Am. He calls.
Papa Alpha 1736, report runway clear.
Pan Am replies.
Okay, we'll report when we're clear. Thank you.
By now, KLM 4805 is already accelerating down the runway, with visibility likely deteriorating even further. The increasing speed demands the full attention of Captain von Zanten and First Officer Merce, who are now focused almost entirely on the takeoff. The flight engineer, Willem Schroeder, has a slightly lower workload. As he listens to the radio traffic, something catches his attention. At 5:06 p.m., he asks, Captain von Zanten, concentrating on the takeoff roll, doesn't hear him at first.
What's that yet?
Schroeder repeats the question.
Is Hyder niet off from 10 American?
Without hesitation, von Zanten replies,
Jawel.
At 5:07 p.m., just 10 seconds before impact, Captain Victor Grubbs finally catches sight of the KLM aircraft through the fog. At first, he believes the lights are stationary, but almost instantly, he realizes the aircraft is moving directly toward them. Captain Grubbs immediately turns the control tiller hard to the left, attempting to steer the Pan Am 747 off the runway and onto the grass. At the same time, he advances the throttles to full power. But the aircraft weighs nearly 340 tons, and there is simply not enough time to accelerate. Inside the KLM cockpit, Captain Jacob von Zanten has just passed V1. Suddenly, through the fog, the silhouette of the turning Pan Am appears directly ahead. He reacts instinctively, pulling the control column fully aft in a desperate attempt to lift the aircraft over the obstacle. The maneuver is so aggressive that the tail strikes the runway, leaving a trail of scraped metal nearly 66 feet long. His final recorded words are a Dutch profanity before the cockpit voice recorder falls silent.
The Pan Am aircraft was given permission to leave the stand and to head down the taxiway to a takeoff point. Now, the Pan Am pilot says that he was told to proceed down the main runway and to leave the main runway and back onto the taxiway at the next junction. He was never able to do that because that was the point of impact.
The KLM briefly becomes airborne, but only by a matter of feet. Its nose and forward fuselage clear the Pan Am, but the number 4 engine tears through the upper fuselage into the first-class section. Moments later, the main landing gear rips through the cabin while the left wing shears away much of the Pan Am's upper structure and vertical stabilizer. The KLM remains airborne for another 500 feet before crashing back onto the runway. Stripped of its landing gear, it slides several hundred more feet before erupting into a massive fire, killing all 234 passengers and 14 crew on board. Originally, 235 passengers had arrived aboard KLM 4805. However, one passenger, Robina van Lanskot, who lived in Tenerife with her boyfriend, chose not to reboard after the diversion. As a result, 234 passengers were on board when the aircraft departed. The Pan Am aircraft continues sliding toward the left side of the runway before coming to a stop, engulfed in flames. Amid the chaos, passengers and crew scramble to escape. Most survivors climb out over the left wing as fire rapidly consumes the aircraft. 70 people initially make it out alive, but 9 later succumb to their injuries. Only 61 of the 396 people aboard Pan Am survived. In total, 583 people lose their lives, making the Tenerife Airport disaster the deadliest accident in aviation history. The tragedy was not caused by mechanical failure. Both Boeing 747s were fully airworthy. Instead, a chain of seemingly minor events, misunderstandings, poor visibility, and unfortunate timing combined to create a catastrophe that forever changed aviation. Following the disaster, ground radar was introduced at many major airports, allowing controllers to monitor aircraft even in poor visibility. Radio phraseology was also standardized worldwide. The word takeoff was reserved exclusively for an actual takeoff clearance or the cancellation of one. In all other situations, controllers and crew used the word departure instead. Critical instructions must now be read back using standardized phraseology, reducing the risk of misunderstanding. Perhaps the most significant change was the introduction of crew resource management. Pilots are now trained to challenge decisions, question assumptions, and speak up whenever they believe something is wrong, regardless of rank or experience. Today, every commercial flight benefits from lessons learned from Tenerife. Every standardized radio call, every challenge from a first officer, every crew trained to question a captain's decision. They are all part of the legacy of the Tenerife Airport disaster, a legacy written at the cost of 583 lives. If you enjoyed this investigation, you might also like my documentary on the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, one of aviation's greatest unsolved mysteries. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.